Welcome to the ProcureTech Podcast, where we aim to excite and inspire you about how technology will shape our profession's future. I'm your host, James Meads, and I worked in corporate procurement for 16 years before starting my own business as a content creator and consultant in the procurement technology space. I'm deeply convinced that procurement must become less technocratic and embrace the entrepreneurial spirit and creativity if we're ever going to shake off our image of being a process-obsessed, box-ticking function. You definitely won't find vanilla content on here, and we're not afraid to tackle some controversial topics and tell it like it really is. So if that's your thing, now let's jump right into this week's episode. Yes, hello, and welcome to another episode of the ProcureTech Podcast. We are the official podcast of procurementsoftware.site. And today I'm joined by a guest who's actually making his third appearance. It's the first one that's been on the podcast 3 times. And my guest is Joël Collin-Demers, principal consultant of Pure Procurement based in Montreal in Canada. And as I said, Joel's been on the show twice before. And in fact, his first appearance was just after the birth of his first child. So it's good to know that even sleep-deprived guests want to come on the show. It's always a pleasure to have him back because he's such a foundation of knowledge in this space, having implemented actually most of the large source-to-pay suite in some capacity. So, Joel, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, James. It's always a pleasure.
Awesome. And today we're going to be talking about readiness for digital change in procurement versus actual capacity for change. But before we do that, just give the listeners, if they've not listened to the previous episodes where we had you on, just give a quick intro to what you do, just to contextualize what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, consulting principal at pureprocurement.ca. I always say that the website now, which is funny, but it's just Pure Procurement. But essentially, work with different customers on their digital initiatives, whether it be looking at processes and the applications that you have and how to optimize those. I've been doing that for just over a decade, right? So spent 6-7 years at IBM, climbing through the ranks, learning the SAP software, the Ariba software, and eventually managing the source-to-pay practice within the SAP practice. And about 4 years ago, headed out on my own because I wanted to have exposure to a lot more different technologies that are in this space, given that there's such an explosion of different possibilities. And I'm always trying to answer the question for my procurement organization clients, what is the best combination of solutions to get us to our business outcomes that we want, right? So that's always what keeps me up at night. What keeps me going as well is that we have this massive tool belt in the industry to be able to answer that question, and the answer is always different based on the context of the organization, whether it be industry, the budget that they have, the constraints that they have, and that's what keeps it interesting over time.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad that you touched on that because, I talk about this a lot, that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And when you do see a CPO of a famous Fortune 500 company being interviewed in one of the procurement and supply chain publications waxing lyrical about a certain solution, fantastic. I'm sure that was great for his or her organization. But your business, the maturity of your business, the size of your business, the country that you operate in, the level of centralization, that's all going to play into, to what extent that tool will be successful or, what may be a better opportunity or better choice for you based on the type of organization you have. So glad we're going to touch on this. So readiness for digital change, what do you mean by that exactly? Because when I was brainstorming, I came up with, and it was a very quick brainstorm, 5 minutes in a coffee shop when I was preparing this, but there were 5 things that I came out with. So the first one was having a software budget, which I guess is the obvious one. Company culture, the talent that you've got in place, the mindset, or maybe the maturity, the prominence, the mandate perhaps that procurement has within that organization. And then finally, the all-important but often ignored one is a C-level sponsor, preferably the CEO or the CFO. But let's be realistic. We know that notoriously CEOs often don't know much or care about procurement. So I've bundled 5 of those on you, but let's try and break those down. What do you mean exactly by readiness?
So to me, readiness for change is, and one of the frameworks I really like going back to is the ProSci ADKAR framework. And ADKAR is just a long acronym for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And essentially, if you're looking at it through that lens, readiness to me is those first 2 letters. So awareness and desire, right? So it means you have an attitude, an organizational attitude that is favorable to change. So in the procurement department, it means you've got that executive level sponsorship. You've got a good idea of where you want to go, the mission, vision behind what you're trying to accomplish with a transformation that may be, over a number of years, but you have a roadmap. Everybody's prepared for the change or is ready for the change, right? Whereas you were discussing that duality with, the capacity to change. That's something that's much more intangible these days and is those additional letters, right? So do you have the knowledge to be able to change and the ability? So I see those as really the two different things. And often we bundle them together. We say, hey, yeah, we're ready to change. We've got our change management team, and that's an attitude. And the other one is a capability, right? So do you have the capacity to change?
So even if you've got your C-level sponsor and a software budget and you've got a conducive company culture to foster that, what you're saying is that doesn't necessarily guarantee success.
That's right, because, and I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm trying to put a framework together because the literature on this is still nascent, right? Like there's not a good framework or evaluation that you can do within your organization that will give you a sense of whether or not you've got the ability or the capacity to change, right? Because when we think about capacity, it's really about, okay, well, do we know what we don't know? Do we know the skills that we don't have? Do we know all these variables that we don't know, essentially, right? So that's what's complex about it is do we have the ability? What is our ability to learn, right? And things that are much more, are concepts or are much more intangible in terms of being able to measure them. Systems thinking, digital literacy, your communication abilities, the level and maturity of your communication and governance structures. Some of them you can measure a bit more, like a governance structure. Do I have a good best practice governance structure? That's something that's a bit more measurable. But again, it's something that if you don't know what good looks like and what the standard is, if I can do air quotes, then it's hard to know what you're lacking in capacity, right? And another aspect is workload, the workload of your folks, right? How are you measuring that today? And how do you know what percentage they're at and what they can take on, additionally speaking, in terms of improvement initiatives, for example. So that's something I'm thinking a lot about today.
And that's the advantage from coming from a consulting background, isn't it? That you just get to see so many more businesses. Whereas and I guess that's often why if you get a new CPO in an organization, they're hungry to make change because they're often people that have skipped roles, on their way up to the top. Whereas career professionals that tend to stick in one organization, they may know the political landscape and how to navigate that very well, which of course has its advantages, but they don't necessarily get as much exposure as to what good looks like or what is holding them back in comparison to professionals that perhaps move around a little bit more. And I think this is certainly in British and North American business culture, it's much more common to move between different organizations on your way up the career ladder, whereas in sort of more continental European cultures, it's a little bit more, I won't say old-fashioned, that's maybe the wrong word, because I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but people often tend to be more loyal to the companies that they work for. So, yeah, I mean, where would you put agility in all of this? Because that's a big one, isn't it? You touched on it a little bit in terms of process and governance, because there are lots of tools, well, not lots, but there are more than there were, in terms of online assessments for procurement maturity, and consultants now have a pretty neat framework that can turn that around pretty quickly versus years ago when they would send an army of people in to do that. But it doesn't necessarily tackle the underlying issues around how easy it is to implement and instigate change within an organization and to adapt processes?
So it's the agility concept is more, how is information flowing within the business, right? So that's something that you can measure a bit more and ensure that, and to me, it's part of that readiness piece, right? Where you're able to say, okay, do we have the governance structures in place where we're able to communicate information up from operational teams to middle managers to executives, and then information down from executives and decisions down from executives to middle managers to project managers and operation teams. So if you've got those mechanisms, then it's a yes or no question, right? You're able to say, yes, we have that in place and it works well, or no, we don't. And you're able to put it in place as part of your readiness, if not, right? So definitely, I think that's something that's a bit more measurable, tangible, actionable. But if we tie it back to, as you were mentioning, on a personal level and folks switching organizations or even using a consulting firm where you have a consultant that has seen a lot of different things, that may bring best practices to the table, but it doesn't consider the context of the organization and the context of the collection of individuals within that organization that will be impacted or that have to deliver that project, right? So that's where I think we need to shed more light on that, not just in our conversation, but as procurement organizations that are working on continuous improvement to say, okay, how do we get our folks, give our folks tools to better know themselves? So that when we ask them, do you have the ability to learn a new skill, the ability to communicate, whether it be written, verbally, listening, all these meta skills, being able to quantify where your strength and weakness is. And so using, typical MBTI assessments, or trying to think of the name for the other one with the colors. There's an assessment with red, green, blue, and yellow.
Oh, color wheel. We did it at Kimberly-Clark. I can't remember the name. Insights, I think it's called. But yeah, I've done that in the past. It's like a personality test based on how pushy or congenial you are in your work and how analytical you are and how you tackle problem solving. Yeah.
That's right. So I think we do those as team building activities often, but bringing that kind of data and knowledge of yourself, and then the collection of all the individuals on the team to get a sense for where your blind spots are and where your strengths are and your weaknesses are, will give you a better sense of, okay, what is our soft skill ability and capacity for change, right? And what do we need to augment in our team to make sure that we don't have any blind spots going forward? And then there's the more knowledge piece of things where it's more, okay, well, do we have digital literacy? Do we know what that means? Can folks on our team pick up an application without much documentation? Or do we need massive amounts of training? And even then, we have trouble keeping up. And so looking at a couple of those things, because when you implement technology in your procurement department, those are the types of things that are going to hold you back, right? In terms of delaying a project or not getting the most out of a solution once it's implemented and the experts that were there to implement it are now gone, right? So there's a soft skill piece, the knowledge piece, and then the workload or the capacity just from a hours standpoint, right? But being able to use those hours correctly is looking back at those soft skills and I'll call them hard skills, your knowledge and ability to learn.
Got it. So let's take the two extremes and then let's sort of dive into talking a little bit about what I guess is where most organizations are, which is somewhere in the messy middle. So the ideal situation is obviously if you've got a mature procurement organization with great people, progressive culture, you've got, as we said, a C-level sponsor, and you've got a budget to go out and buy the software that you'd ideally like to buy. And as luck would have it, you have someone like me or you in your procurement team that knows what they're doing in the digital procurement space and can go out and purchase a piece of software that is user-friendly, fast to implement, and is a modular structure that you can bolt things onto the back of. Great. The reality is in most organizations, we don't have that. In the absolute worst case, you've got a very immature, decentralized function, no mandate, and for whatever reason, you've decided to implement one of these big behemoth, clunky legacy procurement suites that that need an army of consultants and a shed load of training to implement into your system, into your organization, which obviously that probably wouldn't happen, but that's going to be the worst of both worlds. Most organizations find themselves somewhere on the spectrum of, closer to the worst case or the best case. Where do you typically find most of them? And which of these things that we've touched on do you come across most often? And how do you advise clients to go about solving those issues?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, right? Very well laid out. And I think most organizations that I've dealt with in, I'll say, North America, a bit in Europe is I'll put them on in the middle of the continuum, a bit towards the worst case scenario side, right? So digital literacy and being able to pick up applications and knowing about the procurement application space is not given to everyone, and it's not part of the job description for procurement anyways, at least not the legacy description of the past 25, 30 years. I think increasingly it is becoming so because you need to marry process, people, technology correctly to get the desired outcome that you want if you want to be a high-performing organization. But to answer your question more directly, how do I advise that folks go about this to be successful is to start as small as possible, right? So if you think of, I like the analogy of a snowball. If you think of a snowball, it starts off very small. It doesn't look like much. So not very many users, not a big scope. And then you want to put 8 players in that small snowball at the beginning, right? And you want to get them pushing that snowball to generate momentum. And if you do it that way, then, whatever tool you're picking and implementing, it goes live with minimal risk in a given category or with a really small scope of users. And then you're able to grow that naturally over time just because, okay, it works. We don't have very many problems. We can integrate more users into the scope of the application. And then it kind of grows by itself, right, as you push it down a hill. Whereas if you start too big and you have too many users in there from the get-go, and you rely on classic training where, you put them in a classroom, you go through 8 hours of training or however many, depending on the role of the person. And then you go live and you put, hundreds, if not thousands of users in that system at the same time. Then what happens is, you have a number of problems because of people using the system the wrong way, whether it be data quality problems, tickets that start opening up, and then you don't have time to secure the knowledge of the folks all at the same time and then grow from there because you have to fight fires on 100 fronts at the same time. You just have to start managing tickets. And so I think that's the biggest trap is to and I wrote about this on LinkedIn recently, right? To think you're going to transform your organization very quickly and you're just going to implement new processes, new systems, and everything's going to work very well, right? The longest thing to change will be the humans in that triad of people, process, technology, and being able to use technology to our advantage, right? We see it with all this ChatGPT chatter recently where it's not the tool or the output that's the problem, it's the quality of your questions and of your input, right? And I think it's very much the same thing that will determine your success in any procurement application is it's a tool, right? You can use it for good or evil, you can use it well or not well. And so it's a multiplier of whatever you put on it, right? So if you put chaos, it'll multiply your chaos. If you put measured small growth and the small scope growth over time, then it'll amplify those positive results as well.
It is, but then to some extent, there is a certain amount of oomph that you can give the potential of success by choosing the right solution as well, right? I mean, I get completely where you're coming from, that you can put the best procurement tool into an organization that's not prepared and it will fail. But I look at it a little bit like going on a date. Well, why would I, if I've got the opportunity to, then of course I'm going to wear nice shoes and wear cologne, and I'm not going to do my hair because I can't. But, there are little things that you can do that don't really cost anything, but are infinitely going to enhance your chances of being successful. And it's a bit like that with procurement software, I feel, or any sort of project management, that if you do your research and your due diligence and you understand the market up front and see perhaps where solutions have failed or been successful, then in other similar organizations, it's not going to guarantee, but it will certainly give you a flavor. So I do challenge to some extent when I hear, the choice of solutions not important. It's company culture and preparedness. Yes, it is, but I still think that it's a big factor that you can completely influence, because that's completely you're not dependent on. I guess you are in terms of relying on them for implementation, but you're not dependent on third parties for that part of the conundrum. Because if you're ultimately responsible for choosing what solution you go for, along with perhaps the CFO and IT, and that's within your control. Dealing with difficult stakeholders isn't really, you're stuck with them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, man. There is differentiation between different solutions. Doing your due diligence and picking the right one is also an important part of the equation, right? Doing your knowledge. And the bonus is that it helps you in determining your capacity for change, in the sense that you're getting a sense for, okay, what do our people need to be able to meet X business requirement? It's going to mean that we need Y functionality, and then we need Z ability within our firm for administrators or for business users to run that functionality durably over time, right? So any dollar invested and hour invested before you start implemented pays dividends during and after your project as well, right? Because you tailor it, to go back full circle to what we were saying at the beginning, you tailor it to your context, to your capacity and capability to integrate technology into your organization and drive the outcomes that you want. Because at the end of the day, that's why you're implementing technology, right? Is you have a specific objective, a specific outcome that you're looking for, and then you're using technology to enable that.
And it's back to the old Simon Sinek, start with why, or Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind. What's the ultimate end destination that you want to get from that? You shouldn't be implementing software X just because 5 other CPOs that are doing it. That's probably the worst reason why you try and do it.
That's right. Yeah, because for every success story with a given software, you'll hear a very opposite train wreck story for potentially the same industry, right? So really the context matters in these implementations. And another thing it brings to mind is aligning the supplier incentives, whether they be your software vendor or your integrator, to your business outcomes, your desired business outcomes, right? So I always go back to saying, okay, well, if you're going to reach X objective, you need to have adoption of that solution. And to have adoption of that solution, you need folks who know how to drive adoption of that solution to help you do that, right? So if you're able in your contracts with your implementer or with your software provider to bring in incentive measures around adoption of the solution and have them contribute to that with what they've seen in other organizations or contexts, then that could be something that will help you along that journey as well.
So out of everything that we've tackled today on this short interview, which of these do you personally think is the trickiest one to solve? Other than choice of software, which, let's assume that's apart from budget, it's within your control.
Yeah, for me, it comes back to, and that's why I'm doing a lot of thinking on this topic, and our conversation has been a bit scattered, is because I haven't developed a framework yet, but is the capacity, measuring your organization's capacity for change, and then aligning everything else to that, right? Whether it be your project plan, your deployment plan, the type of solution you're going to get. Because you might say, okay, we want to differentiate ourselves on, the sophistication of our contract management process for whatever reason. So we're going to go get a bleeding edge tool for contract management. But when you look at it, the functionality, you can do everything with this tool, but it's too much, right? It's so intricate. There's so many settings and functionalities that you get lost in the sea of functionality, right? So that may, because of the capacity of your people to adopt that bleeding edge tool in your industry or in your particular organization, right? So really being mindful of that and saying, okay, well, maybe that's not where we need to differentiate. Maybe we need to go with a contract lifecycle management that's not best of breed, that's not the most expensive, but that's going to get the job done for this particular vertical in our procurement value chain. And, we'll differentiate on something else, right? So having those discussions internally, though, that deep thinking around what is your capacity, what are your objectives, how do you match the two together, I think is at least is what I'm thinking a lot about recently, because I feel like it's often we have this this dream that we're going to implement these applications and they're automatically going to bring us to the next level, right? It's sort of the silver bullet. But I think it's a mistake to do that because you don't consider your capacity for change and your capacity to, as an organization, integrate that and then as a triad with people, process, technology, then go up to the next level. So I hope that makes sense. It's not too convoluted.
No, I love that. And contract management's an interesting one because as far as I'm aware, there's no contract management tool that's got a robotic arm that pulls contracts out of everybody's desk drawer. And that's usually the biggest problem with figuring out what contracts you've got, right? So I guess if I can paraphrase you a little bit, then what you're saying is then really it's having the self-awareness within your leadership team to understand the relative strengths and weaknesses in your organization and to be able to be cognizant of that when you're going out and looking for procurement tech solutions, and also ascertaining how much support you may need with perhaps data cleaning or implementation or cultural change around bringing people on board.
Absolutely. And also I would add to that the individual contributors' self-awareness of their strengths and weaknesses, which is not something that's given to everyone either, right? Knowing that you're going to have a tough time learning a given technology, or that your weakness is going to be, interacting with folks to get to a final state process, or you're not process oriented, you're more feeling oriented and socially oriented. Like being very aware of that, and also being aware of what is required to deliver one of these projects to give you the best outcome, of course, is another piece, right? So it's that conversation between leadership of how do we perceive our folks? How do they perceive themselves? What's their capacity from a workload standpoint? How do we give ourselves the best chance for success in terms of our soft skills, our hard skills, and our ability to deliver with time?
Fantastic. I'm going to round this off, Joël, by just asking you're putting out quite a bit of content at the moment, and you've got a newsletter and a Substack, and you're also doing a little bit of podcasting, and you've also brought out a course as well. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? And we'll put the links in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. So I've got, an e-course that I came out with recently, which is really targeted at procurement organizations that want to navigate the procurement application market a bit better. So it's really 2 parts. The first part is really breaking down the procurement process into manageable pieces, or getting a common language, common framework around how we discuss the procurement organization. And then the second piece is matching the application market to those definitions and discussing the strengths and weaknesses of the different categories of systems out there, whether they be ERP, source to pay systems, or pure play or best of breed systems, how to match them together, their strengths and weaknesses are. So it gives you really a good foundation on which to jump off from if afterwards you're going to do an RFP, or you're going to market to get a solution, or just crafting a roadmap and an architecture. So essentially, there were discussions I was always having systematically with clients that I said, let me package this so that, even if with my own clients, as I start a project, I give them this 2-hour training and they're able to go through it self-paced, and then we all have a discussion of, we all start at the same spot, right? So that's really the objective with that training. And then, as you mentioned, I'm always I'm always kicking around doing podcasts myself. I have my newsletter that I do at least once a month on the top 5 pieces of content that I found on procurement digital transformation. And just on LinkedIn a lot as well, and just always part of the discussion, trying to be part of the discussion for moving this space forward.
Awesome. And where can we find, is your course on your website, or is it on one of these online course platforms?
So everything is on pureprocurement.ca. So whether you want to find in the store section the course, you want to sign up to the newsletter with the big subscribe button at the top of the website, or you want to punch out to my LinkedIn profile, you can all do it from pureprocurement.ca.
That's easy to do. We will link to that in the show notes. Joël, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming on again. And take care, and let's catch up soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James. Always a pleasure.
Okay, that was Joël, who is Fountain of Knowledge, as I'm sure you will agree in this space. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We know there are a lot of procurement podcasts out there right now. Most of them are actually pretty good. So thank you for choosing to listen to us on this fine day. Don't forget, if you want to get our newsletter, which we publish once a month, go to our homepage, procurementsoftware.site, and you will find the sign-up form on there. Until next time, take care wherever you are in the world. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.